to ask everybody to be seated for, I know there's some people are just getting a cup of tea and drinks. I have to apologise for the noisiness now, but it's a nice warm evening, so I wouldn't ask the officers to shut the windows, but if you feel like it's getting too, then please put your hands up and we'll try and accommodate. Can I first of all welcome you all? I'm very pleased that this is the second meeting in this lovely assembly room, that we had a council meeting, which now first licensing meeting. Can I welcome you all, and before we begin, just like to go around the room introducing each other, as is a first council meeting or first licensing meeting. It would be nice to have the face to the name, and just, I know some of you probably already had that, but it would be just purely, I think, for noting. So from me, I'm Councillor Adisa. I'm chairing currently and City Councillor for this ward.
Thank you, Chair. Lloyd Griffiths, Corporate Director of Homes and Communities.
We go right.
Lucy Robson, Cropper Democratic Services.
Richard Udall, Councillor for the People's Republic of St John's.
Jenny Barnes, Councillor for Arboretum.
Karen Luring, Councillor for Arboretum.
Karen Lawrence, Councillor for Claims.
Steve McKay, Councillor for St Peter.
Andy Stafford, Councillor for Claims.
And I'm substituting tonight for Chris Mitchell, and I'm representing Warnder Parish North.
Jim Carver, Councillor for Nunnery.
Mark Bayliss, Leader of the Council, substituting tonight for Nida Hassan.
Kieran Lahau, Licensing Manager for WRS.
Vanessa Brown, I'm the legal advisor to committee today.
Vanessa, can I ask you to just give us a good housekeeping? We all need to know where things are, but it's vital for the audience to know.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a housekeeping matter, if I may, ladies and gentlemen. If the fire alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. Escape routes are clearly signposted, and once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite to the Guildhall. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing and making audio recording, and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant pages of the Council's website. And by choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded, or for any footage to be broadcast or published. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ask Lucy, is it substitution?
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Bayliss for Councillor Hassan, Councillor Lucy Hodgson for Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Lawrence for Councillor Alcott, Councillor Mackay for Councillor Stanley. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. We're on second item, declare of interest. Any? We shouldn't be here, I take it, before somebody says. Thank you for that. We're going on to the minutes of the last meeting. I'm sure most of you have had a good look at it, and if there is something that you think stands out that needs to be corrected, please indicate. I see none, so that would I have your declaration to sign this as it is? A nod would do. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 6. This is a draft. Who's leading this now? Kieran, thank you. Kieran, over to you, the draft Hackney Carriage private hire.
Thank you, Chair. Statutory taxi and private hire standards. In June 2020, last year, we were told by the DFT that there were some new standards that all local authorities should be adopting in terms of taxi standards for both drivers and operators. And this report highlights those in agenda item 5. These have been long awaited taxi standards by all local authorities across the country, and the legislation was largely due to the extent prompted by the Jane Casey reports on child sexual abuse and exploitation in Rotherham. Both of these reports highlighted examples of taxi private hire vehicle drivers being directly linked to children that were abused, including instances where children were picked up from schools, children's homes, and from family homes and abused or sexually exploited. Therefore, there was a consultation draft by the DFT that took place between February 2009 and April 2019, and those standards, which are entitled the Statutory Taxi and Private Hire Standards, are in Appendix number 1. I'll refer to these standards as the standards throughout the report, rather than the whole title. The standards contain a number of recommendations regarding matters connected to taxi and private hire licensing, and these are listed in 3.7. I'll go through those in a little bit more detail throughout the report. Whilst the focus of these standards is protecting children and vulnerable adults, all passengers will benefit from the recommendations contained in it. The recommendations resulted detailed discussions with the trade, regulators and safety campaign groups. The department therefore expects that these recommendations to be implemented unless there is a compelling local reason not to. In December last year, members of this committee received a report regarding the statutory standards, and we were asked to note that officers would now begin a review of all the council's Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policies. And this has now been undertaken, and you will see that in Appendix 2 of this report. The draft Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy is based on a template that has been used across all districts. So we've used the same template across all the districts within Worcestershire, because we expect that all districts and the city shall adopt a new policy statement, and they'll be similar in nature. Whilst a large number of the recommendations set out in the statutory standards are already met within the council's existing policies, the draft policy has been drafted so as to incorporate any of the recommendations that were not already followed, and I'll go through those now. So the first one is previous convictions. The draft policy explicitly states that the council will not license any individual or who appears on either the children or adult barred list maintained by the Disclosure and Barring Service. The draft policy states that the council will make reference to the DBS where a decision is taken to refuse or revoke a licence as the individual is thought to present a risk of harm to a child or vulnerable adult. It also comments that the council will use the National Register of Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle revocations known as NR3. So as well as checking new applicants against NR3, the draft policy states that the council will submit information to NR3 of any decisions taken to refuse or revoke a driver's licence. We use NR3 already in the local authority, but we do not use it for that purpose at the moment. The statutory standards include recommendations requiring applicants for licences to undertake safeguarding training and demonstrate that they have suitable proficiency in both oral and written English. We currently do safeguarding training, and we do disability awareness training. We don't currently do an English test. So these are things that we'd like to put into place, and we want to put into place a Worcestershire Taxi and Private Hire Competency Certificate, which will encompass all of these things. So our drivers will have that competency certificate as a new driver. So they'll have safeguarding training, disability awareness training, including the knowledge and skills test that they already do, but also an English test. And the standards say that it would be a basic English test so that a driver can communicate with passengers and at least know where that person is going to go. So to support this, officers are currently working to find and approve a suitably qualified and experienced training provider. At the moment, we use the Worcestershire County Council, but we would have to take a procurement exercise to make sure that all the things that we're looking for in the specification, that it is awarded correctly. In line with recommendations in the statutory standards, the draft policy also contains more robust licence conditions applicable to operators. So the guidance says that we now need to make sure that our operators are DBS checked and that they keep records and logs of any drivers that they have on their as their drivers, and also any travel that is taken. The draft policy also introduces a requirement for those applying for a licence to use a vehicle as either a hackney carriage or private hire vehicle to provide a basic criminal record certificate unless they're already licensed by the council. The statutory standards state that the licensing authority should consult on proposed changes in licensing rules that may significant impacts on passengers. So the policy states that we must go out to consult in order to implement any of these proposals within this policy. Just to note that these are proposals and they may change as part of the consultation. We are just looking at the standards that are in Appendix 1 and putting them into the policy that we have already, the handbook, and making it more robust so that we have a fleet of drivers and that are actually that we're proud of to have within Worcester City. The recommendation is that the committee notes the content of the report and authorise officers to now undertake a 12-week consultation exercise with all relevant stakeholders on this policy. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. That's very good. That's very informative. Before I open it up to everybody, this is a 12 weeks consultation, so people could write in other than the people who are here. It would go out to, and have we got the strategy places that each where it goes? I assume it's a standard thing.
Yes.
Because you didn't set that out. That's all I was asking.
Yes, Chair, there's a long list of people that would be consulted on, not only the trade, but a number of people, organisations, and both internal and external to the council.
Thank you for that. That's very kind. We've got Simon, Richard. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right? I've got a few points I want to pick up from your report. There's one or two things from the actual draft policy, which perhaps if I could come back to that a little bit later in the meeting. First one, in paragraph 2.5 of your report, there's a list of recommendations regarding various aspects of the licensing function. I wonder if you could possibly just run us through that list and give us an idea how compliant we are as things stand. Whether obviously with some of these things we're going to be more compliant than others, and it may be that one or two of them we're a long way off. So it might be helpful just get an idea of where the focus of change needs to be. So,
can I come back onto it, Simon? Before Karen answers that, I don't feel that's any relevant to what's already stated. It's written form, what we consulted on. I don't see where your line of question is going, or the.
I'm not quite sure why you don't see that. So,
well, it's on the paper, how it is, but how is it relevant for Karen to run through all these?
well, yeah, just because I've asked if you could do, I think it's reasonable enough to to get an idea of which of these headings under 2.5
It starts on,
are the
2.5,
ones
but
where-
it goes on. It goes just before 2.6, you know, it just carries on, doesn't it? It's back.
2.5, there's a list
It's a start.
of about 10 headings there. Most of them, I don't think we've got anything much to deal with. The point is, there are some where we're a little way adrift from where we will be when the standards are adopted. Anyway, if I can just sort of park that one and just move on. 213, the question about not licensing any individual who appears on the barred lists. I just wanted to ask if that is a devolved decision which licensing officers will take, and if not, perhaps we ought to make it one, because it's a straightforward slam dunk, really, isn't it? And we don't want subcommittees hearing applications for licensing applications, which the answer is obviously no. The next one, 215, this register, the NR3 register, this is really good news that this is finally sort of tying everybody together. A couple of questions really. I wonder how persuasive the inclusion of somebody's name on that register would be. Perhaps you can't answer this, but we have had instances where people have had licenses refused in one area and gone elsewhere and had them granted. This clearly doesn't kind of apply to once one area refuses it, that refusal can't apply to every other area. But do we have any guidance on how much weight we should apply to that? And connected with that, I don't see anything, although I may have missed it, assuring us that updating that NR3 register is something that's mandatory for all authorities to actually engage with. Because obviously, you know, if you don't bother to engage with that, then the information isn't there for other people to use. And are we being advised to, or are we being told we've got to enter information on that? 218, the first thing that came to mind about the qualification for competency certificate was the question of cost. I see that's actually addressed a little bit further on in 4.1. There's an estimate that that's going to be about £63 for a new applicant. I just wonder how accurate a forecast that might be. The reason I'm asking that is because obviously everybody's on hard times at the moment. That's an extra cost. And at £63, it seems like a pretty good deal. But if that were to turn out to be 2 or 3 times that level, then it's going to make a more significant impact on somebody applying for that. So I just wonder how likely we are to be hitting that target. The last thing is 4.3 makes the point that failure to adopt these standards could leave the council open to legal challenge that is not applied to government standards. This may be semantics, but I think it's quite important. Perhaps this is a question for Vanessa, actually. I want to know what the difference is between standards and guidance, because the legislation uses the word guidance. And with that in mind, we're free to be guided by it, but not nailed down. And I think it's quite useful if we can get some kind of a view how strict the word guidance should be, and if it is standards rather than guidance, it would make things a bit easier, because if we've got to do it, then we needn't really talk too much about it, but I don't think that's the case.
Thank you for that. Can I, before you answer, you can, Vanessa, I think you ought to finish the last point, and then I'll get Karen. Before you go, I want to come and ask you. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. These standards have been very long awaited, as Kieran has indicated, and the purpose behind them is to have consistency across all of the districts. And I know, Councillor, that you've been sat on subcommittees before, and there's been concern, and indeed around this table, that there have been different standards applied with different, even within your neighbouring districts. So these are standards, and the intention is that these are adopted unless there's good reason not to. And there would need to be good reason not to, because they come off the back of a very long wait for these standards to be provided, so that there is consistency. And the expectation is that they are standards to be adopted unless there's good reason not to. And that decision is one that you can consider perhaps after consultation, when you have gauged the feeling of the trade and from all other agencies and organisations who will comment on this consultation. It's at that point, I think, members may be in a position to decide whether they consider that there is an exception in this case, or whether actually these standards are what they are designed to be, which are standards to provide consistency throughout. Chair, with your permission, can I perhaps also deal with the question that Councillor Cronin raised in relation to the NR3, because I think perhaps I can assist in relation to that. And in relation to that, again, it follows that if everybody has adopted the standards, then all councils will be putting all the information into this database. And you've been very fortunate, I think, in this area, because you have licensing officers who deal with all of the districts. So the information that each district has when it is dealing with a specific application or a review, it does have the benefit of officers knowing more about an individual than they might otherwise have known, and that has been a huge advantage. It is always going to be difficult with any subcommittee, because if you have one committee that considers an application in one district and refuses, there is nothing to prevent a driver to applying to a different district, and for that subcommittee to come to a different decision. The hope is, of course, that with these standards, you will have much more consistency. And whilst you are always going to have discrepancies, even amongst members sitting, 3 members sitting, deciding one subcommittee application, they come to different conclusions, they come to different reasons. You're going to have that across the board. Yeah, but the intention with the standards is that you will have consistency. And if all councils adopt it, the NR3 will be a vital tool in the armoury to making sure that when somebody is sat before a subcommittee, you have all the information that is known and is relevant.
Thank you for that. Karen, before you answer, I think I tried to get Simon to the first one, the listing bit. I think just to take the second and third. I think that's already explanatory itself on the paper. Thank
you, Chair. So your second question was about delegated, about if somebody's got a DBS, and it highlights that on pages 86 and 87 in the report, it's listed there about what can be delegated and referred to a licensing subcommittee. And it's quite clear that where the applicant has met the council's application requirements and no information has been revealed by any of the checks set out above, that brings into question whether the applicant is a fit and proper person. Officers have delegated authority to grant applications and issue licenses. Authority is also delegated to officers to grant licenses and issue licence to applicants whose DBS certificate reveals a single isolated case or conviction that is more than 5 years older.
Sorry, Karen, you're talking about this page, we're talking about the main report. It's this one. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I don't think the barred list is mentioned in that.
The check that checks both the barred lists. So, and that is the check that a licensing officer would do.
Perhaps don't need to go on about this at too much length, but my understanding is the DBS check gets presented to a subcommittee and we take that on board when we decide whether somebody is a fit and proper person. If they're on the barred list, that we've already seen that means that the decision is going to be no. So what I'm getting at is, if that already is not a delegated decision, it maybe we ought to delegate it. Perhaps not a matter for this committee, but
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we're cross purposes. Karen, have you finished that? Vanessa, do you want to come in? Yes, Vanessa, that to you.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that if it says that the start point will be refusal, and that would be the start point for anybody that appeared on a barred list. But I think it would still have, somebody would still have an opportunity to come before a subcommittee to explain why, even though they don't meet the council's criteria, why it is they would invite members to grant a licence. And I think that it would be very difficult to simply say, well, anybody that's on that list is not allowed to be. I know it says that it would not be granted, but I think it would probably be a safeguard to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to come and be heard.
And Vanessa, just to carry on with that point, I think everybody has a right to apply to whether it is rejected or not. That's the policy. But Karen, it's up to you, Karen, if you want to carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Vanessa's answered the NR3 question, but just to reiterate that in the list, that you in your first question that you referred to, there is a point about member training, and the standards state that member training needs to be more robust, and we would do more training than we actually do currently. So we would go through all this with members at that point in time. The competency certificate, we have said in the policy that we would not actually ask our current drivers to undertake the competency certificate because members have deemed them as fit and proper. So we wouldn't actually ask them to do it. So it would only be for new drivers to take that competency certificate. The cost that's illustrated there is the cost that the DfT have said that would be the cost if we took all of the recommendations in the standards. Now, there's a couple of things that we haven't adopted that we said that we'll look at at a later date, such as CCTV. So even though that is an estimate, it could be smaller than that, but it all depends on the procurement process that we do in terms of finding the right person to actually undertake that training. Lloyd, I don't know if you want to mention the cost about.
Yeah, just to note, members, conversations with chair and vice chair today, they've certainly signalled that if we were able to, they would be keen for us to support any new burdens around this. So it would be something that we would seek to support taxi drivers with any new costs for new applicants in the first 12 months, exactly to counter the point you make, Councillor Cronin.
Thank you, Lloyd. Just to add to the point, I think a couple of years ago, Karen, we offered some sort of tests within the city with our own cost to update and then get them. And I think we issued a certificate as well for approval who have passed. And because of some couldn't make it, we rearranged meetings for the rest of the drivers. So I think that the current fleet, as you would call it, have that certificate within their grasp. So that's very helpful. Thank you for that. Richard is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Unlike Councillor Cronin, I only have one question. Following Councillor Cronin's a bit like following De Gaulle. It's impossible, but I'll do my best. I have a question on the red new comments which are on the draft policy, and I can understand why they're here, and I fully support it. But it's about the issue of CCTV cameras in Hackney Carriage and private hire vehicles on page 89. Totally agree with what's been said, but I have got an element of concern that there needs to be a little bit more safeguarding and changes required to this rule change to satisfy people with civil liberty concerns and health and safety concerns of the passenger, who have the right to ask for the cameras to be turned off if they so choose to do so. We haven't got that enshrined within the rules, and I would certainly like to see that included, especially for people who do not want their journeys recorded for whatever reasons, for issues of safety, be taken to a place of safety, or for whatever reason they're traveling with somebody they don't want other people to know about. Maybe it could be a variety of reasons, but I would think there needs to be some sort of guarantee and protection for people who don't want their journey to be recorded, and whether they can request that to be turned off.
To you.
Thank you, Chair. In the proposals, we've said that CCTV is such a big area, and it's been proposed within this committee so many times that we'd need to look at it as a separate project rather than look at it as part of this consultation. What we have said in there, however, is that if anybody chooses to put CCTV in their vehicle, that they do need to let us know, because at the moment there is not clear guidance by the Information Commissioner's Office about who owns the data. And until that comes out, we're quite reluctant to actually give any advice and guidance on that. So we understand that this committee has been quite passionate about looking at CCTV, and we will put it in the consultation, but at the moment it's not something that we want to use in this
That does concern me a little bit, Chair. I can hear what the officer's saying, but it is within the proposed changes within the documentation that the council recognises that CCTV systems can act as an additional safeguard, etc., etc. Now, maybe we need to illustrate that the rules regarding CCTV are subject to change and reform as we move forward, and there may be significant rule changes as a consequence, because I am concerned about the civil liberty issues, about the issues of people requesting it to be switched off if they choose to do so. And as I said, there could be a variety of reasons for that, including issues of safety and protection. So I would like to see some protection for that within the proposed rules, if we can actually do something to protect people's rights not to be recorded.
Thank you, Richard. Can I ask Lloyd to answer that one?
Yeah, Chair, I was only going to make a small point. That's certainly something we can take away and look at in a bit more detail. And it's not a perfect answer, but I suppose it comes down to customer choice, isn't it? If a member of the public went to a taxi and there's a camera in it, they may choose to sort of take another taxi without a camera in it. So that's not a perfect answer, but that choice is there. But we'll certainly take that away and look at.
Well, it clearly needs to be illustrated as you get into a taxi, but there's a camera there. If that's going to be an issue of customer choice, obviously covert cameras would not be recognised, and people won't have that choice.
No, thank you, Richard. I think it's answered and read. Anybody else got any? Before I call Simon, anybody else? No? Okay, Simon, it's over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, the other issue I was keeping up my sleeve was CCTV. You people have heard me rabbiting on about this for so long. The concern I've got about the policy is that it rather says, if you want to put CCTV in your cars, then go ahead, and is not much more helpful than that. The first question is about who is the data controller. And I think until that question is answered, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to be saying anything to taxi drivers about whether or not they put CCTV in their cabs. especially as we may at some point in the relatively near future be coming back to them with specifications of acceptable equipment which meets the standards on security, data control, etc., etc. And if they've just spent money putting something in and we come to them and say, well, actually, that doesn't meet the standards. My feeling is unless we're going to actually nail this one, we ought to keep out of it. But the issue of the data control is, to my mind, the crucial one, because my understanding is that the licensing authority has to be the data controller. Maybe Vanessa's looking at me, so I perhaps she might like to say
Yeah,
something
no, I
on
think
that.
Vanessa, it's yours.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think the council is the data controller for the purposes of this particular policy, because what this policy is simply saying to drivers is if you have CCTV, you have to tell us that you have it. It is incumbent upon a taxi driver to make themselves aware of the data restrictions that they have, that they must put signage up, etc. The burden sits with them to make sure that if they are putting CCTV in their vehicles, that they do so and that they're entirely compliant. But the local authority would not be the data controller, as I understand it, unless either Kieran or Nick would want to tell me otherwise. It seems to me that this is designed as something simply to say to drivers, just tell us that you have it. But unless the local authority made it mandatory, at which point we would have to consider who the data controller is, I think at this stage it remains the responsibility of the driver. And this is simply an exercise in making sure that we know that there is CCTV in certain vehicles.
And just, I think, illustrate the point that if some people feel that they're not element safe and they want to go out and spend whatever the cost is to setting up these things, it's mandatory on their own. But the only way is, I think the council, allegedly the council advising them, to, if the police or somebody else say they're aware of this particular vehicle does have CCTV and it's advertised. And Richard's point comes in cross. If they want it turned off, it needs to be recorded they wanted it turned off. I think that's, but anyway, that's another element.
Years to reach the point where all we're doing is saying, well, if you want to do it, you can. And we're not getting any more involved. We know people who would have very much benefited from having CCTV in their vehicles. And
yeah, I think I'm with you on that. Yeah. Okay, if we got nothing, can we note the report? Just to have a nods head, yes, yes. Thank you for that. Moving on swiftly. This is of course, if you're spending a few pennies somewhere where you shouldn't, the Gambling Act. Karen, is that yours as well? Oh my God, you have a busy night tonight. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The Gambling Act review of statement principles need to be reviewed every 3 years by all licensing authorities. In 2018, we did a very large project on this, and we changed it a lot in terms of guidance given by the Gambling Commission.
Yeah.
This year, 3 years later, we haven't made many changes to it. The last revision was done in 2018. We've made a few minor revisions. We've updated the introduction section of the statement to reflect the council's current corporate strategy and priorities. The list of consultees shown at Appendix B of the statement has also been updated to reflect some of the gambling trade associations and to include additional organisations involved in working with people who experience problems within gambling. The consultation on the revised draft statement principles will take place with all relevant parties that are listed there. The consultation will also be made available for comment via the council's website and publicised via social media and through the local press. Given there are only a few minor revisions, we are also recommending that it is a 6-week consultation process. and any responses received during the consultation will be brought back to this licensing committee later this year.
Thank you for that. Anybody want to pick this up? Oh my goodness, that's very swift then. So you've been asked to note the 6 weeks consultation. Can we have a agreement? Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, moving on. We're on item 7, which is a task and finish. Is that? Oh, Lloyd, I thought you were going to escape.
I better do some work. Chair. I better do some work.
Over to you, Lloyd.
This is an information report, Chair, relating to the taxi strategy task and finish group. Members will be aware of the setting up of the group back in 2019, and the purpose of the group was to consider the opportunities and challenges that the taxi trade will face over the next several years, and how we as a council, what role possibly could we play through possibly a strategy setting out those challenges and how we get around them. It was a cross-party elected members group supported by officers. The group's met several times since October 2019, but inevitably, Chair, the pandemic did have an impact on the frequency of meetings, particularly with officers having to dip in and out of response and recovery work. But the group did meet several times. There were 3 focus areas for the group, Chair. The first was environmental performance of fleet, and the group analysed the makeup of the council's current Hackney carriage and private hire fleet, reviewed the various different types of vehicles currently licensed, the age of the fleet, and the current vehicle emission types and standards. The group also explored the challenges and feasibility of hybrid and electric vehicles. On the back of that, we engaged initially with the trade back in November 2020 around electric vehicles to sort of look at what they saw as the challenges and opportunities associated with the transition. And it was clear that there were many real challenges, not least the current cost of electric taxis, the change there probably is going to be to vehicle types over the next sort of several years, and the extreme challenge around public charge infrastructure. So there were certainly challenges that we were aware of, but we probably underplayed slightly, particularly from an officer point of view. So at this point, Chair, it's clear that much further consideration needs to be given to how we, not just alone, but with colleagues at the County Council and other agencies, and can support our drivers and operators over the next 7 years to transition on. And much further work required, much more understanding to be gained before we start to set out what our strategic ambition is. We need to understand the extent of the problem first and how we can play that support role. So it's intended, Chair, that work becomes mainstreamed into officers' work programme and is not taken forward via a strategy at this point in time, given the amount of work that's still required. The second focus area was vehicle branding and livery. And again, the group considered the appearance of our current taxi fleet and the ambition to support our local drivers and operators through having clearly branded Worcester cabs, helpful to our residents and to our visitors. We looked at the costs of designing and implementing door decals and the practicalities around making that happen. And there was universal agreement throughout the task and finish group that because of the shared benefits of introducing this, it would be good if the council could cover the costs of that were coming in at that time at around £9,000. And that was supported by the leadership of the council at that current time. However, Chair, again, with the pandemic and the impact that it's had on the taxi trade and probably the host of burdens they're having to face at the moment, it doesn't feel the right time to be pushing on that. Something we certainly want to intend to do in future. But again, having consulted with officers from WRS, that doesn't need a strategy. That can be picked up as a policy change that we can consult on and engage with members on when the timing is right. Thirdly, Chair, vehicle and driver standards. I'm not going to stress this point because we've just discussed it for the last half an hour. So again, when the group was set up, the guidance hadn't come out. The guidance is now out, and thankfully we approved the paper tonight that will see us consult on that new policy. So again, Chair, there's no need for that to be wrapped up in a strategy at the moment either. So Chair, the 3 areas of focus I've sort of just covered very, very briefly. And again, just to stress the impact that the pandemic has had on our taxi trade and our drivers and operators. And again, it just doesn't feel at the moment we should be setting out any additional burdens on our drivers. And moving forward, we will look to pursue these via a series of policy changes when the timing is right and bring these back to members for discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anybody got anything to add? Simon? Yeah, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I think what Lloyd said is absolutely reasonable. It seems to me that in the current circumstances of these focus areas, it's either inappropriate to pursue them any further at the moment, or they're more appropriately going to be adopted through policy developments. So what occurred to me, we're only being asked to note contents of this report. It does occur to me that we still have a task and finish group sort of in limbo somewhere. So I'd like to propose that we amend that recommendation, or amend or add to note the contents of the report and agree that further work of the task and finish group is no longer necessary. Because we might as well just close it down. I think it was jointly set up by us and Environment Committee, but there doesn't seem to be any point in it continuing to sort of exist.
Yeah, I think I'd be quite content with that, Lloyd, but the only sort of caveat, if you like, that the bit that you related to last point that you want to consult, I wanted more emphasis put on the other districts to have some good points where there is people who go from one boundary to another and there's charges are not there, so that further work absolutely needs to be done. So, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the clue is in the name. They're called task and finish. And this has done its task and now is finished. So I think I agree with Councillor Cronin's substantive point, which is the task and finish group is at an end. So, but I thought that was a taken as read, the fact that they produced a report and that's the end of it.
Yeah, done. So that's a thing for less work for the. I think you would go along with that, Lloyd. Happily. Yes. Okay. We will take that. We'll add that. Can we? Everyone who's doing that bit of adding, and for that caveat, can I call it? Oh,
Chair,
Richard.
just an element of concern as a member of the task and finish group. I think it was incredibly a frustrating experience that we wanted to do a lot of change and bring a lot of forward some radical ideas and progressive changes, especially by encouraging the transfer to all electric taxi fleet, which is something which would have benefited the city considerably. But I can understand the timeframes involved, the difficulties of the local economy, and especially post-COVID, that's probably not the good timing for that. I think that quite clearly the task and finish group has to close, has to finish. Most of its members are no longer here as members anyway, and certainly not members of the licensing committee. But I think it may be something which we may want to reconsider in the years and months ahead, that when we look at this situation again, because I think there is scope for reform, scope for change, and hopefully hope for progress and reform within the sector, which we can actually do a lot to achieve through a task and finish group. So rather than kill it off, I would say freeze it, but I can understand the comment which have been made.
Yeah, I think we're hopefully by revisiting it again whenever, because the task and finish can be set up whenever you feel like it, and then technology probably have improved. We'd be probably better off making some decision. So I'm going to give you last time, and that's it. I don't know.
Its point. It's maybe helpful that in the next item on the agenda, we've got the update on the task and finish group into air quality. And that actually does have an item which maybe that covers the issue that Richard's particularly interested in.
Well,
and if it does, then perhaps it avoids us duplicating work, which I think that to an extent that task and finish group, which we've just closed down, rather did.
I think we're going to. Yeah, thank you for Simon. Can we just the latter point finish is the word. I think that's I think everybody's got that. Thank you for that. Right. Yeah. Can we have a sort of yes. Thank you. Item 8. I think Simon was ahead of ourselves. That's for you. Thank you, Lloyd. It's yours.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, should look at it. No, yeah.
You got those on? Yeah, is that fine? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. This again is an information report updating members on the air quality task and finish group recommendations and just updating members on progress. Again, this is a group set up in 2017. In the paragraph 2.2, I've set out there the recommendations, the 6 recommendations, but I don't intend to go through read those line by line. And appendix 1 of the report is a more detailed update on progress. But just very briefly, Chair, if you indulge me. In respect of recommendation 1, then the council's corporate leadership team are playing a sort of a lead role in decisions taken at an operational level and strategic level around air quality. And that's very much my background, so I take a lead there myself on that. Recommendation 2, this is an interesting piece of work. So we've kicked off a mapping exercise around different layers of information. Air quality, off-street parking challenges, existing EV charging infrastructure, and land availability for alternative off-street charging infrastructure. So we're looking to pull all that together and provide some sort of mapped information around where areas of need are. And then when we've got that, to talk to colleagues at the County Council, both public health and highways, around any opportunities that exist there. Recommendation 3, there have been no sort of policy changes, Chair, in respect of car parking charges or physical infrastructure. So that one has not been able to be sort of taken forward yet. But obviously with the fantastic news over the last several months, with government funding having come in, big capital projects for the council, regeneration, that one will come to the fore. So we need to take into account air quality considerations there, both from a positive and perhaps mitigating any impacts. In respect of recommendation 4, Chair, obviously the pandemic has had a huge impact on how we operate as a business. And even before that, we were sort of relatively low grey mileage users. I think that's probably to do with the geography of the city. And I've mentioned that sort of key services such as environmental health and licensing are also shared service, so don't sit within the council. So the viability of introducing a pool car system for officers, I think is a bit of a struggle, but we'll certainly keep that one under progress and keep it under a watching brief. Recommendation 5, we've sort of covered that off with the task and finish, taxi strategy task and finish group item, Chair, but far more work to do on that with the trade and understanding those challenges. And then I think recommendation 6, Chair, this was the sort of wrap-up recommendation, I think, sort of drawing together the previous 5 recommendations. And one that I need to do a bit more work with yourself and Vice Chair on, just to understand what role a low emission strategy can play, and particularly viewing that in light of the environmental sustainability strategy that the council has approved. We don't want to be duplicating. We want to be very clear on what if we're going to go down a strategy route, what do we intend it to do, and how does it benefit any existing sort of principal strategies. So in summary, Chair, 2 recommendations fully completed, 2 partly progressed, and aiming to be concluded during this year. 1 not progressed due to limited opportunity, and 1 that requires further consideration. So bit of a whistle stop, Chair, but hopefully that'll do it.
Right, thank you for that. Any uptakers for that? Anybody wants to bring? Oh, Simon.
There's anything tonight, but
No, go on.
it's just a quick one, actually. Well, a couple really.
Yeah.
On the first one, I realise that this is covered under the health and safety implications. I would have felt happier if it had had a standalone heading in the implications list that forms a sort of ending to all our policies. However, it clearly it does relate to health and safety. The other thing really is the last point, number 6. It's just the question, when do you think that we could get to that point where this, I appreciate there's a lot of work involved in it, but do we have a kind of a sort of timeline when that can be being addressed.
Yeah, Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Cronin's probably answered his own question on the first one, if you don't mind, Chair. But the second one, we don't have a timeline, Councillor Cronin. Now the environmental sustainability strategy is sort of published and sort of well in place. I've sort of committed to talking to Chair and Vice Chair around the low emission strategy and what that now means for us. So I'd like to think that over the course of the next couple of committees, I can be clearer with you on what that means and when we're looking to do something possibly.
Important this is, obviously, you know, we've got to be realistic about how much work's involved. But,
Thank you, Simon. Then, Richard, you're going to follow.
I've got absolutely nothing to say on this subject whatsoever, Chair.
You beat me. After, did I see anybody else? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to see that you're investigating e-bikes for staff. I'm just wondering, of course, with e-bicycles, because they're quite expensive, you need to look at secure storage for them, and there isn't much of that around the city at the moment. So how will you address that if you do go down that route?
Thank you for that. Noted.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that away as a learning action point, Chair, if you don't mind. I'm not aware of the actual detail, but we'll certainly, if we are investing money in something, we want to make sure they're secure. So I'll take that away. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's very helpful.
I recently visited Hereford. They've got barrel bikes, and the barrel bikes themselves have got trackers in, so they know where their bikes are. So something similar to that.
Okay, that's helpful. Mark?
Well, we're digressing slightly, but just for,
yes, please.
For the new members' perspective.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
Our £19.6 million Towns Fund bid, which has now been approved, contains a significant proposal around electric bikes. And so, you know, I'm always pleased to point that out and to remind people that, you know, both the Conservative government and this council are keen to support electric bikes.
Thank you, Mark. I think Lloyd already alluded to it. He's well trained and bad. So we are very pleased that these hard times, anything we can get, but this is a huge amount. Anybody else? Oh, Richard. I'll come to that. Let's finish this one. Can we note it? Agreed. Thank you. Richard, do you have any other business?
Yeah, with your permission, Chair, and I apologise for not giving you prior notice of this, but I think it's something which we may want to consider in a bit more detail, maybe at an item in the future. And I would like to give some consideration to the establishment of a task and finish group to investigate our response and problems to the nighttime economy here in Worcester, especially with the licensing of premises, with the intention of seeking ways to protect staff and people who use the nighttime economy. I know that large cities, Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, London, have already done this kind of work and have come out with a number of suggestions and proposals about how they can reform the number of licensed establishments in the city centre, with conditions and suggestions and requests for the industry to comply. There are a larger number of issues. I asked a question of some residents not long ago, and freedom from abuse and verbal and physical threats, rights to breaks at work and rights to time off at work, and most importantly, the issue of getting home safely, all issues which were raised by people who work in the nighttime economy. So I don't want to have that debate here and now, but what I would like is to table this as an agenda item in the very near future, so we can establish a task and finish group to look at this in more detail and come back with recommendations on how we can improve the nighttime economy through licensing within Worcester, and to discover ways in which we can actually offer ways of protection both for the trade, people working in the business, and people who are using it. So I think at the moment there is a problem out there, and it's quite clearly obvious, and people are aware of it. So I would like some consideration in the future for a task and finish group to give the consideration to these.
Chair, perhaps that's one we can pick up with yourself as Chair, Chair, Vice Chair. I know that other members have got a view.
I mean, I'd be interested to have other members' views for all this. If there is something that they've been indulged on or come up with, there'd be other things that I want to introduce in the future, or maybe we can pick that up. Anybody want to pick that up? Anybody else want to? Content? Yeah, no, we'll pick that up. Well, as I said at the end of it, we can have task and finish groups set up, and whenever you need on a particular thing, there's nothing, you can always finish them very quickly as you did the last one. Mark,
Chair, I'm happy for you to come back with an agenda item so we can discuss it in more detail. Now is not the time to have that
No,
discussion,
we've
but
had
I'm more than happy to have that agenda item so I can be outvoted by you at another stage.
yeah, absolutely, Mark, absolutely.
I think it's quite a good idea, but I hope this isn't a precursor to me reading about this on what day is it today? It's Tuesday, so on the front page of Thursday's Worcester
Well,
News.
that's
So I'm sure it's just a spontaneous item from the member, but I assume it is not a precursor to seeing him out in front of in some nighttime economy venue.
Yeah.
Chair, I must respond to that comment.
Can we have?
Maybe you should learn a lesson from me, Mark.
Okay, thank you. I think we got with Carol, yes?
Sorry, Chair, I'd just like to say this is an extremely serious issue. We are a university city. We have got people, you know, young women coming home late at night, and actually this is something that should seriously be looked at and shouldn't be a political game. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mark, you want to come back?
I don't like to school a new member, Mr. Chairman, but of course this is AOB at your
Yes,
agreement, and this is
I
on
think-
urgent, according to the addenda, this is on
No.
urgent items. The members made the suggestion which you've taken. We're not debating the subject here tonight.
No, thank you for that. I think being new members, it takes a bit of a getting used to our working, and I think maybe we probably need to do a bit more work on that. But yes, I take Richard's point, and we will consider it and look at it. Well, I'm not saying that. What else? I'm sorry. You can certainly make lots of requests, but it will, as you rightly said, it will be to the members to put it through. I mean, half of the committee is a substitute at the moment, but so leave it with me. Did you want to come? Yes, sorry.
We not all that long ago lost a young student who happened to go over the bridge. We don't know how he came to go over that bridge, whether he put himself over that bridge or was put over that bridge, and that is quite a concern. So, you know, there is if you're alone in the city and you get to a dark area, it is very frightening. And I can assure you it's very frightening when you feel you're being followed down an alley. And I know we've asked this before, so I think this is something, you know, these people do need to be seen home safe. You know, it's something most of us take for granted, and it should be, this protection should be offered to them. And if their employers aren't going to, I think they need to be nudged in that direction.
I think Lloyd wants to come in there.
Chair, I think nobody's disagreeing with the sentiment and the seriousness of this, but Councillor Udall has asked for an agenda item to be on a future committee. That is within your and your vice chair's gift, Chair. We will take that offline for further
I will
discussion.
talk to the vice chair and we'll sort it. But thank you for that anyway, for the input. Anybody else? No? That concludes the order of the day. Thank you very much for your indulgence and very calm and